Mind is just a shadow. Attempts to catch it and control it are futile. They are just shadows chasing shadows. You can't control or eliminate a shadow by chasing it or by putting a shadow hand on it. These are just children's games. Ram Tirtha once told the story about a small boy who ran down the street trying to catch up with the head of his shadow. He never managed because, no matter how fast he ran, the shadow of his head was always a few feet ahead of him. His mother, who was watching him and laughing, called out, "Put your hand on your head." When the boy followed this instruction, the shadow hand caught up with the shadow head. This was enough to satisfy the boy. This kind of advice may be enough to keep children happy, but it won't produce satisfactory results in the realm of sadhana and meditation. Don't chase your shadow thoughts and your shadow mind with mind control techniques, because these techniques are also shadows. Instead, go back to the source of the shadow mind and stay there. When you abide in that place, you will be happy, and the desire to go chasing after shadow thoughts will no longer be there. Bhagavan often told the story of a man who tried to get rid of his shadow by burying it in a pit. The man dug a hole and then stood on the edge of it in such a way that his shadow was cast on the bottom of the hole he had just made. After lining it up in this way, he started throwing soil on the shadow in an attempt to bury it. Of course, no matter how much soil he put in the hole, the shadow still remained on top of it. Your mind is an insubstantial shadow that will follow you around wherever you go. Attempts to eliminate or control it cannot succeed, while there is still a belief that the mind is real and that it is something that can be controlled by physical or mental activity. But the shadow mind must still be eliminated by some means. When self-realization happens, mind is no longer there. However, you do not get self-realization by getting rid of the mind. It happens when you understand and know that the mind never existed. It is the recognition of what is real and true, and the abandonment of mistaken ideas about the reality and substantiality of this ephemeral shadow you call the mind. This is why Bhagavan and many other teachers kept bringing up the analogy of the snake and the rope. If you mistake a rope on the ground for a snake, the snake only exists as an idea in your mind. That idea might cause you a lot of worry and anxiety, and you may waste a lot of mental energy wondering how to avoid the snake or kill it. But this fact remains. There is no snake outside your imagination. When you see the rope, the substratum upon which your false idea of a snake is superimposed, the idea that there is a snake and that it is real instantly vanishes. It is not a real snake that has disappeared. The only thing that has disappeared is an erroneous idea. The substratum upon which the false idea of the mind has been superimposed is the self. When you see the mind, the self, the underlying substratum, is not seen. It is hidden by a false but persistent idea. And conversely, when the self is seen, there is no mind. But how to give up this false idea that the mind is real? The same way that you give up any wrong idea. You simply stop believing in it. If this does not happen spontaneously when you hear the truth from a teacher, keep telling yourself, I am not the mind. I am not the mind. There is no mind, there is no mind. Consciousness alone exists. If you have a firm conviction that this is the truth, One day this firm conviction will mature to the point where it becomes your direct experience. Consciousness alone exists if you generate a firm conviction that this is the truth. Eventually, this firm conviction will become your own direct experience. Consciousness alone exists. That is to say, whatever exists is consciousness alone. Keep this in mind and don't allow yourself to regard anything else as being real. If you fail and give even a little reality to the mind, it will become your own false reality. Once this initial wrong identification, I am the mind is real, has happened, problems and suffering will follow. Don't be afraid of the mind. It's a false tiger, not a real one. Something that is not real cannot harm you. Fear and anxiety may come to you if you believe that there is a real tiger in your vicinity. Someone may be making tiger noises as a joke to make you afraid, but when he reveals himself, all your fears go because you suddenly understand that there never was a tiger outside your imagination. One can have a temporary experience of the self, the underlying reality, but then it goes away. Can you offer any guidance on how to stabilize in that state? A lamp that is lit may blow out if the wind is strong. If you want to see it again, you have to relight it. But self is not like this. It is not a flame that can be blown out by the passing winds of thoughts and desires. It is always bright, always shining, always there. If you are not aware of it, it means that you have put a curtain or a veil in front of it that blocks your view. Self does not hide itself behind a curtain. You are the one who puts the curtain there by believing in ideas that are not true. If the curtain parts and then closes again, it means that you are still believing in wrong ideas. If you have eradicated them completely, they will not reappear. While these ideas are covering up the self, you still need to do constant sadhana. So going back to your question, the self does not need to stabilize itself. It is full and complete in itself. The mind can be stabilized or destabilized, but not the self. By constant sadhana, do you mean self-inquiry? Yes, by strength of practice, by doing this sadhana, this veil will be removed completely. There will be no further hindrances. You can go to the top of Arunachala, but if you are not alert, if you are not paying attention, you may slip and end up at Isyanamat. You have to make an enormous effort to realize the self. It is very easy to stop on the way and fall back into ignorance. At any moment, you can fall back. You have to make a strong, determined effort to remain on the peak when you first reach it. But eventually a time will come when you are fully established in the self. When that happens, you cannot fall. You have reached your destination and no further efforts are required. Until that moment comes, constant sadhana is required. Is it important to have a guru at this stage, this period when constant effort is required? Yes, the guru guides you and tells you that what you have done is not enough. If you are filling a bucket with water, you can always add more if there is still space. But when it is completely full to overflowing, it is pointless to add even a single drop. You may think that you have done enough, and you may believe that your bucket is full. But the guru is in a better position to see that there is still a space, and that more water needs to be added. Don't rely on your own judgment in this matter. The state you have reached may seem to be complete and final, but if the Guru says, you need more sadhana, trust him and carry on with your efforts. Bhagavan often used to say, the physical guru is outside telling you what to do and pushing you into the self. The inner guru, the self within, simultaneously pulls you towards itself. Once you have become established in the inner guru, the self, the distinction between guru and disciple disappears. In that state, you no longer need the help of any guru. You are that, the self. Until the river reaches the ocean, it is obliged to keep on flowing, but when it arrives at the ocean, it becomes ocean and the flow stops. The water of the river originally came from the ocean. As it flows, it is merely making its way back to its source. When you meditate or do sadhana, you are flowing back to the source from which you came. After you have reached that source, you discover that everything that exists, world, guru, mind, is one. No differences or distinctions arise there. Non-duality is jnana. Duality is samsara. If you can give up duality, Brahman alone remains, and you know yourself to be that Brahman. But to make this discovery continuous, meditation is required. Don't allocate periods of time for this. Don't regard it as something that you do when you sit with your eyes closed. This meditation has to be continuous. Do it while you're eating, walking, and even talking. It has to be continued all the time. How does the gnani relate to his body? How does it feel to him? The gnani is not really aware of the body, or if he is, he feels it like akasha, space itself. After one of the operations to remove the tumor on Bhagavan's arm had been completed, I was worried enough to send a girl who worked for me to the ashram to ask how Bhagavan was. I could not go myself because Bhagavan had asked me not to visit him. When this girl told Bhagavan why she had come, he started laughing very loudly. I interpreted this to mean that nothing had really happened. His laughter was a message to me that Bhagavan was not his body, and that I should therefore not be upset or worried by anything that happened to it. Years before, I was walking on the hill with Bhagavan when he remarked, I don't feel the weight of the body at all. I feel as if I am walking weightlessly through the sky. I sometimes have the same feeling when I'm walking around. I was not here yesterday, but it seems that someone asked a question about the vibration that comes off a gnani. You also apparently talked about the vibrations that ordinary people and bad people give off. Can you repeat what you said? A gnani's vibrations stay even after he leaves the body. All people have vibrations in the places they have been and lived. Jnanis leave a good vibration and bad people leave a bad vibration. I am not talking about a gross physical phenomenon that everyone can feel. The vibration that a gnani leaves is subtle. Radio broadcasts can only be heard if one has a radio that is tuned to the right frequency. You tune in to a gnani's vibrations by having a quiet, still mind. This is the wavelength of the broadcast. If you have not tuned yourself to receive this frequency, you cannot expect to experience or benefit from the vibrations that a gnani may have left in a place. Is the intensity of the vibration more if we stay close to a living gnani? Yes. Is it the same with Arunachala? Yes, no doubt about it. Bhagavan himself has said that if one lives at the foot of Arunachala, one does not need any kind of initiation. If one's intentions are pure and holy, merely living here can be a good sadhana. Guhe Namasivaya a saint who lived on the hill a few centuries ago, said in one of his poems that this Arunachala hill draws seekers in the same way that a magnet attracts iron. In ancient times, the Shakti, the power of this hill, was hidden, but Bhagavan made it open to everybody. Bhagavan sang about this in Aksharamana Malay, verse 98. I have made public your doings. Do not hate me for this. It is rare for Bhagavan to make such an open declaration about something that he had done or accomplished. He rarely used the word I when he referred to some event that had happened in earlier eras of his life. Sometimes he would use the passive form, something like, something happened to me. At other times he would go to the extreme of using someone else's name when he was telling a story about something that happened to himself. I am going back to Europe for 2 months. It may be longer because there is a possibility that I may have to prolong the trip. Even if you prolong your trip, Arunachala will pull you back. Pulling back is its nature, in the same way that a magnet's nature attracts iron. Once you establish a connection with Arunachala, it will keep on pulling you towards it. You cannot resist. So, is it dangerous for us to come and visit this place? It is only dangerous for the ego. Until we become one with Arunachala, it will pull us to kill the ego. The water in a river cannot rest where it is. The force of gravity compels the water to flow downwards, back to its original source. You said that merely living near Arunachala could be good sadhana. The same thing must be true of living near a gnani. You have told many stories about how living with Bhagavan transformed people, even those who were not making much effort to meditate or do any other formal sadhana. Yes, we were all immeasurably benefited by being in his presence, by doing ordinary, everyday things with him. He was always available to give advice about sadhana if anyone wanted to ask about it. But we were also benefited by his presence and by the example he set on how to live life properly. For much of the time, Bhagavan would appear to be a lenient, tolerant, easygoing father. If we didn't follow his instructions about various aspects of our lives, it would seem for a while that he was allowing us to go our own way. Sometimes it would even seem as if he was approving some of the wrong things that we were doing. But slowly, when the time was right, he would lead us back to his own way. So when people did things that were really bad, he didn't complain or interfere? When Bhagavan lived in Mango Tree Cave, a man called Jada Swami gave him a lot of trouble. At the beginning of their relationship, whenever Jada Swami conducted a puja, he would invite Bhagavan along and then ask him to bang the drum at the culmination of the ceremony. This effectively relegated Bhagavan to being a minor functionary in Jada Swami's puja. Jada Swami would put on quite a good show, so much so that many passing pilgrims or members of the public would be attracted to these ceremonies. It helped, of course, that Jada Swami cut a very imposing figure. With his long, matted hair and a fierce look, he looked like an archetypal ascetic sadhu. However, many people attending the pujas noticed the radiant expression on the face of the young boy who was banging the drum, and some of them began to prostrate to him because they could detect something of his radiant holiness. Jada Swami got very jealous when he saw this happening, but he tried to recoup some of his self-esteem by telling these visitors, "He is my disciple, so you can do namaskar to him as well." Bhagavan never objected when Jada Swami behaved like this or made untrue claims about him being a disciple. When it became clear that Bhagavan was going to attract a big following of his own, Jada Swami got jealous and tried to drive him off the hill. On one occasion, when Bhagavan was sitting outside Virupaksha cave, Jada Swami even tried to kill him by rolling a big boulder onto him. Bhagavan, who was sitting with his back to Jada Swami, got an early warning of the attack when he heard some little pebbles cascading down the rock behind him. Bhagavan jumped up and caught Jada Swami red-handed. When he confronted him and asked him what he was doing, Jada Swami tried to bluff his way out of it by saying that he was just playing a practical joke. "I was just doing it to see if you would get afraid," he said. Bhagavan never criticized him, even after this incident, and the two of them continued to live side by side on the hill for several years afterwards. This behavior, these things that Jada Swami did, they are not the sort of thing that one would expect from a sadhu living on Arunachala. Guhe Namasivaya, who lived on the hill several centuries ago, was also famous for his bad temper. In one famous incident, he cursed a group of weavers who had been causing him trouble. Within a short time, all their businesses failed. The curse was apparently a long-lasting one, for in the years that followed, all attempts to start weaving businesses in Tiruvannamalai failed. So would you say that Bhagavan was very tolerant of people who treated him badly? Yes, he never responded in a negative way to criticism. Sometimes he would even laugh when people said bad things about him. He was indifferent to praise and blame. They didn't touch him. When Puramal Swami printed his insulting book about Bhagavan, Bhagavan simply said, "Keep the book in front of the ashram so people can read it there. The good people won't believe it, but when the bad people read it, they will stay away and leave me in peace." This happened in the 1930s, at a time when large crowds of people were starting to come to Ramana Ashram. Purumal Swami did a good job of distributing the book himself, for many of the casual visitors from town stopped coming. It was a bit of a break for us, because many people would just come at meal times hoping to get a free meal. These freeloaders were a disturbance for all of us. Sundaram, Annamalai Swami's translator, spoke. "The same is happening here. We cooked a special meal for Punarvasu and invited some devotees to eat. Without telling Swami, one man brought 17 extra people, none of whom were devotees. We had never seen any of them before. We had only cooked food for 15 people. If 1 or 2 extra people had come, we could have managed. But we couldn't give a meal to all these extra people. We divided the food up into very small quantities and fed all these unknown people who had just shown up to eat. When the meal was over, they started wandering around, making a nuisance of themselves. They disturbed the people who were still cooking in the kitchen, and they stole the sandals of one of our devotees. Swami doesn't mind meeting with sadhaks who want to discuss important spiritual matters, but he doesn't like these functions where lots of people come. He is very weak most of the time and wants to save his energy for important matters. I just give vibhuti to most of the people who come, but no matter how much I discourage visitors, they still come, often for no good reason at all. I am physically weak, so I can only deal with people for short periods nowadays. I am a bit like a well that is fed by a small spring. A few people taking buckets of water out at the same time will empty the well. Then they will have to wait some time for the water to flow in again before they can take more water. A devotee who came to Annamalai Swami had so much pain in one of his legs, he found it very difficult to sit comfortably on the floor. After Annamalai Swami had observed the difficulties the man was having, he made the following remarks. Though the body is needed for sadhana, one should not identify with it. We should make good use of it and look after it well, but we should not pay too much attention to it. There are so many thoughts in the mind, thought after thought after thought, they never stop. But there is one thought that is continuous, though it is mostly subconscious. I am the body. This is the string on which all other thoughts are threaded. Once we identify ourselves with the body by thinking this thought, Maya follows. It also follows that if we cease to identify ourselves with the body, Maya will not affect us anymore. Maya is fundamentally non-existent. Bhagavan said that Maya literally means that which is not. It is unreal because everything that Maya produces is an outgrowth of a wrong idea. It is a consequence of taking something to be true that is not really true. How can something that is not real produce something that is real? If a barren woman says that she has been beaten by her son, or that she has been injured by the horns of a hare, we would rightly take her to be deluded. Something that does not exist cannot be the cause of suffering or of anything else. Maya may appear to be real, to have a real existence, but this is a false appearance. The truth is, it is not real. It has no existence at all. How to get rid of this I am the body feeling and of the Maya that is produced by it? It goes when there is saman bhava, the equanimity or equality of outlook that leaves one unaffected by extreme opposites, such as happiness and unhappiness, and pain. When saman bhava is attained, the idea I am the body is no longer present, and Maya is transcended. Is the body to be regarded as unreal, as not me? What attitude should I have towards this body and all the sensory information it provides me with? By itself, this body is jada, inert and lifeless. Without the mind, the body cannot function. And how does the mind function? Through the 5 senses that the body provides. Mind and body are like the tongue and teeth in the mouth. They have to work in harmony with each other. The teeth do not fight with the tongue and bite it. Mind and body should combine in the same harmonious way. However, if we want to go beyond the body, beyond the mind, we have to understand and fully accept that all the information the senses provide is not real. Like the mirage that produces an illusory oasis in the desert, the senses create the impression that there is a real world in front of us that is being perceived by the mind. The apparent reality of the world is an illusion. It is merely a misperception. When the mind perceives a snake where in reality there is only a rope, this is clearly a case of the senses projecting an imaginary image onto a real substratum. This, on a large scale, is how the unreal appearance of the world is projected by the mind and the senses into the underlying reality of the self. Once this happens, we see the superimposition, the unreal names and forms we have created, and we forget about the substratum, the reality that underlies them. Many examples are given by our teachers and by our spiritual books. If you see a carved wooden elephant, for example, at some point you forget that it is only wood. You see the form of the carving, and your mind gives that form the name elephant. While your mind is registering this name and this form, you are no longer registering the object as a block of wood. It is the same when you see jewelry made out of gold. You see a shape, call it a ring or a necklace, and while you are studying the form, you temporarily forget the substance it is made of. Self-inquiry is the process by which attention is put on the substratum, instead of on the names and forms that are habitually imposed on it. Self is the substratum, out of which all things appear to manifest, and the gnani is the one who is continually aware of the real substratum. He is never deluded into believing that the names and forms that are perceived by the senses have any real existence. Whatever we see in this room, for example, that picture of Bhagavan over there, is unreal. It has no more reality than the objects we perceive in our dreams. We think we live in a real, materially substantial world, and that our minds and bodies are real entities that move around in it. When the self is seen and known, all these ideas fade away, and one is left with the knowledge. Self alone exists. If I regard all the people that I see and meet as unreal projections, what do I base my moral sense on? I can go around killing them or robbing them without feeling guilty, because I would know that they are just characters in my dream. Everything that we perceive is Maya, an unreal dream. But one should not then think, since everything is unreal, I can do what I like. There are dream consequences for the bad acts committed in the dream. And while you still take the dream to be the reality, you will suffer the consequences of your bad behavior. Do no evil and have no hate. Have equanimity towards everything. Annamalai Swami then turned to a devotee who had been sitting motionless, with his eyes closed in front of him. If you sit in meditation for a long time without moving the body, the mind gets dull and tamasic. Even moving the toes while sitting is a good way of getting rid of the tamas. Mirabai used to dance and sing. That's a good way to meditate. Giri, pradakshina, walking around Arunachala is also good. It's walking meditation. Today I'm going to tell you a story I once heard. A rich man lived in a village. From his youth till his old age, he had spent all his time accumulating wealth. He owned many houses and vast tracts of land. As his material wealth increased, his ego expanded with it. He enjoyed boasting about his wealth. One day, as he was sitting in front of his house with a stick in his hand, a poor man who was known to be a little stupid passed by. "Why are you holding that stick in your hand?" he asked. The rich man decided to have some fun with him. "It's a special stick," he replied. "It has to be given to an idiot. This stick is passed from person to person, and each person who receives it must pass it on to someone who is more stupid than he is." Giving him the stick, he continued, "Now it is your turn to own it. You must keep it with you until you find someone who is an even bigger idiot than you." The poor man humbly accepted the stick and began his quest to find someone whom he felt had even less intelligence than he did. Since he was, by a long way, the least intelligent person in the village, he could not find anyone to give the stick to. A few weeks later, he heard that the rich man was sick and dying. He went to visit him, partly to pay his last respects and partly to tell him that he hadn't managed to find anyone to give the stick to. He took his custody of the stick very seriously, and he wanted advice from the rich man on what he should do with it. After some preliminary conversation about the rich man's health and the fate of the stick, the poor man asked the rich man what was going to happen to all his money when he died. "I have to leave all my money here," answered the rich man. "I don't know where and when I shall be reborn, but I do know that I can't take any of my money with me. I shall have to start off with nothing again." He relapsed into a glum silence, not relishing the prospect of being parted from his money. The poor man, who had never really considered this aspect of dying before, thought about it for a while and then came to a conclusion. "You must have the stick," he said, handing it back to him, "because I have suddenly realized that you are an even bigger idiot than I am. Though you have had a long life and many opportunities, you have accumulated nothing of value that can carry forward with you. You have no peace of mind because you are worried about losing your money, and you have accumulated no good karma because you have spent your whole life pursuing selfish ends. In a few days, the piles of money you have amassed will have the same value for you as piles of garbage. This money will have no value for you in your next life. By devoting your entire life to the accumulation of things, that will ultimately prove to be of no use, you have demonstrated that you are a worthy recipient of the stick. He placed the stick on the rich man's bed and left. That reminds me of a strange comment the disciple once made about his guru. He called his guru a heap of garbage and referred to himself as a hen. When asked about this, he replied, "A hen can always find something good to eat so long as it keeps busy scratching around in the garbage. But effort is required. If the hen stops scratching, a supply of food stops." I wasn't here yesterday, but I was told that someone asked the following question. I have been following Bhagavan's teachings for many years, but without any obvious benefits. I don't feel any peace. What am I doing wrong? Why am I not getting results? Self-inquiry must be done continuously. It doesn't work if you regard it as a part-time activity. You may be doing something that doesn't hold your interest or attention, so you think, I will do some self-inquiry instead. This is never going to work. You may go 2 steps forward when you practice, but you go 5 steps backward when you stop your practice and go back to your worldly affairs. You must have a lifelong commitment to establish yourself in the self. Your determination to succeed must be strong and firm, and it should manifest as continuous, not part-time effort. For many lifetimes you have been immersed in ignorance. You are habituated to it. All your deeply rooted beliefs, all your patterns of behavior reinforce ignorance and strengthen the hold it has over you. This ignorance is so strong, so deeply enmeshed in all your psychological structures. It takes a massive effort over a long period of time to break free from it. The habits and beliefs that sustain it have to be challenged again and again. Ignorance is ignorance of the self, and to remove it, self-awareness is required. When you come to an awareness of the self, ignorance vanishes. If you don't lose contact with the self, ignorance can never arise. If there is darkness, you remove it by bringing light. Darkness is not something real and substantial that you have to dig out and throw away. It is just an absence of light, nothing more. When light is led into a dark room, the darkness is suddenly no longer there. It did not vanish gradually or go away piece by piece. It simply ceased to exist when the room became filled with light. This is just an analogy because the self is not like other lights. It is not an object that you either see or don't see. It is there all the time, shining as your own reality. If you refuse to acknowledge its existence, if you refuse to believe that it is there, you put yourself in an imaginary darkness. It is not a real darkness. It is just your own willful refusal to acknowledge that you are light itself. This self-inflicted ignorance is the darkness that has to be banished by the light of self-awareness. We have repeatedly to turn to the light of the self within until we become one with it. Bhagavan spoke about turning inwards to face the self. That is all that is needed. If we look outwards, we become entangled with objects and we lose awareness of the self shining within us. But when, by repeated practice, we gain the strength to keep our focus on the self within, we become one with it, and the darkness of self-ignorance vanishes. Then, even though we continue to live in this false and unreal body, we abide in an ocean of bliss that never fades or diminishes. This is not going to happen in a moment because lifetimes of wrong and ignorant thinking have made it impossible for most of us to focus intently and regularly on the self within. If you leave your house and start walking away from it, and if you continue this habit over many lives, you will probably be a long, long way from home when you finally decide that you have had enough and that you want to go back to where you started from. Don't be discouraged by the length of the journey, and don't slacken in your efforts to get home. Turn 180 degrees to face the source of your outward journey and keep moving back to where you started. Ignore the pain, the discomfort, and the frustration of seeming not to get anywhere. Keep moving back to your source and don't let anything distract you on the way. Be like the river on its journey back to the sea. It doesn't stop, take diversions, or decide to flow uphill for a while. It doesn't become distracted. It just moves slowly and steadily back to the place its water originated from. And when the river dissolves in the ocean, river is no more. Only ocean remains. Jiva, the individual self, came from Shiva and has to go back to Shiva again. If there is a big charcoal fire and one burning ember jumps out, the fire in the ember will soon go out. To reignite it, you have to put it back into the fire, back into its burning source. There is no happiness in separation. The jiva has no happiness, contentment, or peace as long as it remains a separate being. The separate being comes from the self. It has to go back there and end there. Only then will there be eternal peace. The energy of the mind comes from the self. In the waking state, the mind functions as a separate entity. In the sleep state, it goes back to the source. Again and again, it comes out and goes back. It does this because it doesn't know the truth of what it really is. It is self, and self alone. But its ignorance of this fact makes it miserable. It is this feeling of separateness that gives rise to desire, suffering, and unhappiness. Keep the mind in the self. If you can do this, you can live in peace both while you are awake and also while you are asleep. In deep sleep, all differences are dropped. If you keep the mind in the self during the waking state, there will also be no differences, no distinctions. You will see everything as your own self. How can we recognize a gnani? For a mature seeker, there is one principal symptom of being in the presence of a gnani. If the seeker's mind becomes quiet without any effort, then this is a good indication. But this is not a test that is valid or conclusive for everyone. If an immature seeker sits in the presence of a gnani, his or her mind will probably remain just as active as ever. It is very difficult for ordinary people to determine who is and who is not a gnani. There are no consistently reliable tests. This reminds me of a story that was told by Ramakrishna. A sadhu was sitting in samadhi in the shade of a tree by the side of the road. A man who was walking down the road glanced at the sadhu and thought, "He is probably drunk." The sadhu was shaking a little, and the passerby assumed it was a drunken tremble. Another man walked by, but his train of thought led him to a different conclusion. "That man looks happy. He is probably waiting for his girlfriend to come." The sun was setting as the next man came along. He saw this shadowy figure sitting under the tree and thought, "He may be a thief. He is probably hiding under that tree so that he can jump out and attack people who pass by. I will give him a wide berth just in case he turns out to be dangerous." He took a little detour through the fields because that made him feel safer. Shortly afterwards, a fourth man came along. He was an advanced spiritual seeker, and in the gathering gloom, he could detect a halo of light around the sadhu's head. This must be an enlightened man, he thought, and so he went up to him and prostrated. People perceive jnanis through the distorting prisms of their minds. More than that they cannot do. If you put on yellow glasses, everything you see will be colored yellow. Change the color of the lenses, and the color of what you perceive also changes. The gnani has no distorting lenses or prisms to obscure, fragment, or change his vision. He sees everything as God, as his own self. How do we get this unobscured, unfragmented vision? Bhagavan wrote an Uladu Narpadu that perceived objects are of the same nature as the one who perceives them. In the waking state, the gross physical eyes see gross physical objects. In the dream state, the subtle eye sees subtle dream world objects. Beyond that, there is the eye of the self. Since the self is infinite and immaterial, what it sees is infinite and immaterial. The gnani, being self alone, sees and knows only the self. Bhagavan's explanation of this verse can be found in Mahayoga. If the eye that sees be the eye of flesh, then gross forms are seen. If the eye be assisted by lenses, then even invisible things are seen to have form. If the mind be that eye, then subtle forms are seen. Thus, the seeing eye and the objects seen are of the same nature. That is, if the eye be itself a form, it sees nothing but forms. But neither the physical eye or the mind has any power of vision of its own. The real eye is the self, as he is formless, being the pure and infinite consciousness, the reality. He does not see forms. Annamalai Swami continued, the self shines all the time. If you can't see it because your mind has obscured it or fragmented it, you have to control your vision. You have to stop observing with the eye of the mind, because that eye can only see what the mind projects in front of it. If you want to see with the eye of the self, switch the projector of the mind off. The infinite eye of the self will then reveal to you that all is one and indivisible. Going back to the question of how to determine who is and who is not a gnani, can we not come to some valid conclusion by studying his life and his teachings? Will not his state be somehow reflected in the life he leads? You cannot determine the answer to this question by studying the teachings or the behavior of a person you think might be a gnani. These are not reliable indicators. Some jnanis may stay silent. Others may talk a lot. Some are active in the world. Some withdraw from it. Some end up as teachers, while others are content to stay hidden. Some behave like saints, whereas others act like madmen. The same peace can be found in the presence of all these beings, since this peace is not affected by the modes of behavior, but there may be no other common factors. Jnanis are supposed to have an equality of vision. Can we not decide whether someone may be a gnani on the basis of whether he treats people around him equally? Jnanis remain absorbed in the self at all times, and their apparent behavior is just a reflection of the circumstances they find themselves in. Some may appear to be egalitarian, others may not. They play their allotted roles, and though they may seem to be involved in them as ordinary people would be, they are not really touched by any of the events that occur in their lives. Equal vision may be there. Internal equanimity may be there. But don't expect all jnanis to behave in a prescribed egalitarian way. Bhagavan often used to cite King Janaka as an example of a gnani who was fully involved in the affairs of the world. But when his palace caught fire and was burning to the ground, he was the only person in the vicinity who was not disturbed. In this same story, there was a group of sadhus who lived near the palace. When the fire began to spread, they panicked and began to collect their sticks, their spare kaupinas, their water pots, and so on. They had very few possessions, but they were still very attached to them, and they definitely did not want to lose them to the fire. They were more worried about their spare underwear than Janaka was about his palace. Janaka watched his palace burn to the ground with complete equanimity. When you have this jnana, your inner peace is a solid rock that cannot be disturbed. Being rich and being a king will not obstruct jnana. It's just a question of having the right attitude. There is a story in Yoga Vasishta about a king called Mahabali. He had lost interest in his kingdom, his riches and his pleasures because he had developed a strong desire for jnana. He summoned his guru, Sukacharya, to court and asked him what he should do to attain jnana. Mahabali was assuming that Sukacharya would tell him to renounce his kingdom and go to the forest and meditate. Instead, Sukacharya told him, "I am the self. You are the self. All is the self. That's all you need to know to attain this jnana you are looking for. I cannot give you any lengthy teachings today because I have to go and attend a meeting of the gods. Anyway, lengthy teachings are not needed. Just remember the words I have told you. If you can hold on to this knowledge, I am the self at all times. No further practice or initiation will be necessary." There is another story about Janaka that I like. A man called Sukabrahman called on Janaka for spiritual advice. "I am a seeker of truth," he said. "What can you tell me?" "What did you see while you were coming here?" asked Janaka. "I saw houses made of sugar," answered Sukabrahman. "I saw streets made of sugar. I saw trees and flowers made of sugar. I saw animals made of sugar. I saw your palace and saw that it was made of sugar. Everything I saw was made of sugar. As I stand here, I see that you are made of sugar, and that I also am made of sugar." Janaka laughed and said, "You are a ripe soul. You don't need any teaching. You are already a gnani." Some people realize the self just by hearing the guru's words. How is this possible? Disciples who are spiritually very advanced can realize the self as soon as they hear the truth from an enlightened guru because the words of such a being have great power. If you are in this advanced state, they will reach your inner core and reveal to you the peace that is your real nature. When the guru tells you that you are the self, there is a power and an authority in those words that can make them become your own reality. If you are pure and ready, no practice will be required. One word from a gnani and this state will become yours too. How does the mind project this world I see in front of me? Everything we see in this waking state is a dream. These dreams are our thoughts made manifest. Bad thoughts make bad dreams, and good thoughts make good dreams. And if you have no thoughts, you don't dream at all. But even if you do dream, you must understand that your dream is also the self. You don't have to suppress thoughts or to be absolutely thoughtless to abide as the self. If you know that even your waking and sleeping dreams are the self, then the thoughts and the dreams they produce can go on. There will not be a problem for you anymore. Just be the self at all times. In this state, you will know that everything that appears to you is just a dream. What I'm trying to say is, how do thoughts and desires create this world we live in? It doesn't seem possible that all this that I see could be a manifestation of my hidden desires. Imagine that a man has to catch a train at 3 a.m. He goes to bed thinking, I have to wake up before that so that I can catch this train. Then sometime during the night he has a dream in which he wakes up at 2:30. He remembers the train journey, gets out of bed, goes to the station, boards the train, and takes his seat. Then he thinks, I got up early this morning. I am a bit sleepy. I will lie down and have a nap. He stretches himself out and goes to sleep. The next morning he wakes up at 8 a.m. in his own bed at home and realizes that he has missed his train. His whole journey had just been a dream that had been provoked by the thought, I must wake up before 3 a.m. The waking state which you take to be real is just an unfolding dream that has appeared to you and manifested in front of you on account of some hidden desire or fear. Your vasanas sprout and expand miraculously, creating a whole waking dream world for you. See it as a dream. Recognize that it is just an expansion of your thoughts. Don't lose sight of the self, the substratum on which this vast, believable dream is projected. If you hold on to the knowledge, I am the self, you will know that the dreams are also the self, and you won't get entangled in them.